You'll tell me.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I would now like to. Are you very? Where would you like to sit? Would you?
I think I'm standing.
You're
here.
going to
Yes.
stand. Okay. Well, I'll stand.
Yes.
I'll sit here then. Yeah. And we'll get the. Now our next speaker is Dr. Phyo, and she is making a real name for herself in exploring the relationship between Abhidhamma, particularly the Patana, ritual, meditation, theory, and doctrine. And she's really looking at that very fluid relationship in Burma between them. She was a lecturer at King's College, then she became Dean of Shan State University, and luckily we have her now back in Oxford, where she's a tutor in Buddhist studies. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and also to the organizers and for inviting me to speak about the meditation tradition in Burma. And particularly what I will be doing is looking at visual experiences, some of which Kate has already mentioned. And so before we get into the specific meditation tradition and the practices that meditators within this traditions experience, I will be talking a little bit about overview of meditation traditions in contemporary Burma, and then focusing on the founder of this tradition, and then within the teachers and their experiences and the teachings, and then looking specific cases, so asubhanimitta, so meditation on impurities, as well as the Abhidhamma part, which is the bhavaṅga-citta. So to give you an overview of Burmese meditation traditions, this chart is actually from one of my ongoing research in into meditation traditions in contemporary Burma since the 19th century. And we can see here the famous Lady Sayadaw, so the first one, but it doesn't mean that he's the first or the only monk who was meditating around that time in the kind of 19th century. But in the scholarship, we find more evidence how he came to be known as one of the founders of Burmese Vipassana movement. And then from there, we find a range of meditation monks and also the teachers. And we can see here another famous Sayadaw that I would like to highlight here is Unarada Mula Mingon Sayadaw Zetawanda. So there was there's very recent PhD work being done on Jetawanda Mula Mingon Sayadaw as well. Very famous in terms of being one of the teachers of Mahasi Sayadaw. Okay, so I think almost everyone knows who Mahasi Sayadaw was, because he started a very famous Mahasi Vipassana tradition in Burma, then later spread globally. And then what we find also is in the kind of final column, I was trying to find textual basis in which these meditation teachers they were drawing their authority from. And we can see here, so for example, Lady Sayadaw, he very much focused on canonical texts as well as Abhidhamma texts. Mula Mingon Sayadaw, the founder or very closely linked to Mahasi tradition, he drew very much on Mahasatikatthana Sutta a very famous kind of very well standardized text in Burmese meditation traditions. And then we then have another kind of very famous Sayadaw as well, Solon Sayadaw, so Ukkaṭṭha, and then Theinngu Sayadaw, Ukkaṭṭha. Look at how I highlighted the two, because they are these Sayadaws, they are very closely linked. Okay, one of the kind of unique feature of these two traditions is that they don't draw on any textual background. Why? Because these Sayadaws, these monks, teachers, they were not educated in teaching monasteries, which Burma is very famous for, and they started practicing meditation on their own. They didn't have any teachers, as it were. And then we then have now very famous Kyaw Sayadaw. Again, Kyaw Sayadaw's tradition and the lineage is interesting because it's very much closely following Visuddhimagga. So you go through different stages of jhanas as you progress along the path and the practice. So what I'm here presenting to you is kind of an overview of what's happening in contemporary Burma in terms of meditation practices. Of course, there are really, really interesting teachers and the way that they teach, which we don't know much about. For example, here, I'm trying to find, Mount Hamyezin Sayadaw, Usobida, so the Kani Sayadaw here. So that lineage is also very interesting. This is where, Kate talked about internalization, and then in Tibetan tradition, we find externalization. In Kani tradition, that's what we find. So the teachers would ask the meditators to focus on particular nimitta and then project visions out, and you are to travel and transverse the universe, if you like, and also all the cosmos. So, but we as far as I know, we have very little information on that, and we need to do more work on it, combined with field work. So, because, for example, this tradition has now a center in the US as well, but we need more field work to do on this tradition. So, but for those who are interested in Burmese meditation and the lineages, I highly recommend Gustav Hoffmann PhD thesis, although it was done in very, in the 90s and 80s. It's fabulous. I highly recommend that work. So a little bit about, so going to the tradition that I have been practicing in since 2007. So we are going to look at Theinngu Sayadaw in particular. So this is one of the two teachers that I mentioned, and he's in a way kind of younger than Solon Sayadaw. So he was born in Lower Burma. He was a layman. He was sent to a monastery for education, but he came out with very little literacy, basically. He was a robber, like you can see on the slide, and then he married 4 times. So he has a very colorful life as a layman before he started practicing meditation. During one of the robberies that he kind of led, he had these kind of a near-death experience. So he was robbing a house, and then his head was almost chopped off because someone came with an axe and then kind of tried to kill him. But he escaped, But that actually, in terms of kind of experience, encouraged him to pursue meditation, essentially, because he became so afraid of death that he thought, okay, I better do something good now. The story is very similar to Sonlon Sayadaw as well. So like here I mentioned, but Sonlon, Sonlon Sayadaw was a farmer, so very traditional life, but again, he also had this kind of, if you like, samvega, as a, kind of awakening of spiritual urgency that he felt. So Theinngu Sayadaw again practiced meditation on his own and known to have attained, the third stages of liberation as a layman, and then he ordained. And then within I will come back to Q&A with educated monks later when I explain a little bit, after I explain a little bit about his experience. In Burmese Buddhism and Burmese Sangha, that element is very important in terms of authority. Okay, so just keep that in mind for now. So let's look at Theinngu Sayadaw's practice. So what did he do? So he had this kind of near-death experience, and he became very frightened of death. So he went back to his village. Before he did that, he went to his wife, who was in one of his wife in Yangon, and then told her that, okay, I'm going to do meditation. You can have the house and everything. And then he also went to another wife at the same time in the village. Same again, talk to her. Okay, you can just have the house and everything, and you can remarry if you want, and so. And then he then went back to his home village and started practicing at the village monastery. He took 9 precepts. He was on kind of, as far as I know, vegan diet, because he lived on beans and peas and rice, basically. And then he was meditating many hours. And in terms of the practice itself, he was actually focusing or using this kind of technique, which might be similar to yogic or yoga breathing technique. Very fast, very rapid, rhythmic breathing. This breathing technique was used by Sonlon Sayadaw as well, and he would sit for many long hours. According to Theinngu Sayadaw himself, he said that he experienced very intense bodily sensation, a lot of pain, partly because of all the lokia, all the wali things that he had done as before. So he adjusted his breathing rate in order to handle the intense vedana that he was facing. So if the vedana increases, he was following kind of faster, shallower, in order to increase the awareness, as well as just to give the mind some kind of focus. Because the mind can, for those who practice, and I'm sure here as well as online, there are many meditators joining, and you would know that when when you start to meditate, the mind can get to kind of very stiff, kind of very focused. So not to get into that, he was using the breathing technique a lot. So that increased sati and samadhi, of course, so mindfulness as well as the concentration. So you can see here the kind of schedules that he was following. So if we, I'm going to be now explaining a little bit about the broader aim that Theinngu Sayadaw was trying to do. based on his Dhamma talks. So basically, he talked about kind of overcoming wrong view, deity, and overcoming tanha, so craving. For him, deity or wrong view is very much in relation to one's own body. So, and personalizing our experience, personalizing our body. And then craving, of course, he talks about attachment to his former wives. And as far as I know, he had a child, but that child passed away many years ago. So you know, he didn't really kind of have family then. So if we look at his practice on the whole, there are 3 key steps. And the first step we can summarize in terms of overcoming painful physical sensation or vedana. He's tried to deal with that using the breath, like I said. And then his meditation simultaneously kind of led to asubha meditation. I say this kind of simultaneous kind of arising because he was not really kind of visualizing asubha meditation or impurities, but it just arose while he was doing the breathing. And then he followed that through until everything turned to dust. And then he was focusing more on latent defilements, you know, attachment to the concepts and saññā. He talks about saññā a lot, also perception. So just a little bit focusing on asubha, because we are at a conference talking about visual experience. There are other elements that I could talk about his practice, but I want to focus on this. So, like I said, Theinngu Sayadaw experienced simultaneous arising of asubha. Okay, so if we look at his biography and his talk, that's what we see. So he in those sources, he said that, you know, the body parts and the vileness or the ugliness of the body, his body parts came up in his meditation. And then he was able to kind of not contemplate, but all he saw was this ugliness of his own body as well as others. So the former wives, for example. And then there are different stages of asubha meditation that he described. So bloated stomach, eyes bulging out, smelly liquids and foam coming out from the mouth, and then eventually from the body. The face become very large or very kind of discolored, you know, different stages, which in a way kind of very standardized in if we look at Visuddhimagga, for example, that there are different stages described as well. And then he saw these signs of asubha in daily life, and in meditation he could not eat or sleep after seeing all of these, because everywhere he looked, even kind of tables and chairs and the buildings, or if the famous Sayadaw Pagoda, all he saw was crumbling and decay and all those kind of ugliness. So you see here, the nimitta talked about internalization, but also here it's also kind of to an extent externalization of these things. So because in Theravada meditation traditions, you know, one has to focus on oneself as well as on others. So it's both internal and external. Eventually he got to a point where he did not want to see any of these, and he wanted to escape from those. Of course, you know, if we can talk about in different jnana stages or knowledges, realization of bhavaṅga-citta or seeing the cessation, and then kind of becoming repulsive of these nimittas, which are kind of we can find those in Visuddhimagga, of course. And then so just to kind of explain a little bit more in terms of detail of the progression, as it were, because one of in the title, title of my paper, I mentioned peeling lotus petal, or as I would say, if you ask me honestly, it's like peeling onions. And I think that although lotus petals sounds very pleasing and romantic and very nice, it's more like if you ask a meditator, they might say it's more like peeling onions, because in onions you have thin layers. Those are the very sticky parts that you have to work on a lot in order to overcome various things. So just to explain this slide, so the first one is, according to Theinngu, he saw asubhanimitta, and then trying to, or he saw self as asubha, as well as external things as asubha. And then what he noticed was kind of this, Kate mentioned moving from nimitta to animitta. So here, going to kind of mental states. So this is where we start to see kind of dosa, so hatred. Hatred as in aversion to these asubhanimitta. He doesn't want to see it anymore. It's so kind of aversion, as it were. And then what he did was he then start to focus asubha in terms of asubha as in kind of our bodies and the whole thing in terms of 4 elements. So 4 dhatus, the 5 aggregates. So gradually he's moving away and getting more subtle. So this is where what I mentioned about, kind of very sticky parts and trying to overcome that. And then overcoming the perception of asubha. So even, our concepts, our idea and the label that we use, he was trying to overcome that. So in Theinngu traditions, they talk a lot about perversion of perception. So this idea that our saññā, our perception, is kind of like to an extent, kind of obstacle. We at a very subtle level, we have to overcome that. So for those who work on Madhyamika, it's a little bit like that. Going beyond all the conceptual construct. Okay, so the way that he overcame was using cause and effect. So again, very similar to Madhyamika approach, going to Paticca cause and effect, and so that's how he explained his experience. So what we can see from here is a very detailed kind of progressive steps and how one can overcome various from nimitta to animitta and so forth. The next part I'm going to explain is because Theinngu passed away before I was born, but Venerable Usiritama, he passed away, but I practiced under him, under his guidance since 2007. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about my own teacher and also other teachers in his tradition. So again, he was born in Lower Burma. He was married. He himself practiced under the founder, Theinngu when he was 24, so very early on. His life was also very eventful because he became civil servant, and then he then ordained, and then he got disrobed, and then he started kind of going down the path of Vasa traditions, meaning kind of a very much kind of samatha focus, but with all the supernatural powers that comes with that. And then he was ordained again, and then he came to my hometown, which is Ye or Bro, and then he established meditation tradition. That's how I came to know him, and I practice under him. So this is the meditation center that he established. So I was ordained as a nun in 2008, and then 2020. For those who know me, I ordain occasionally. So every 5 years or so. I'm not fully nun, but yes. So my life also has very eventful things happening. So the last time that I got ordained, it was in 2020, just before the pandemic hit. And then I was practicing meditation at the center, and then I went to Shan State Buddhist University as well. So yeah, right. So here in the very final part, what I'm going to be talking about is the stages of practice as taught at this meditation center. Okay. When we look at the scholarship on meditation, Theravada meditation, we can see that a lot of work being done on kind of beginner stage, and you know, we know how the tradition and how the practice begin, but we very rarely get to the point of discussing advanced practitioner state, although things are changing. You know, Sarah's as well as Len's cousins, the booklet Sarah Shaw edited and Lens wrote, that's also kind of changing and contributing to the scholarship. But here, what I want to highlight is for the beginner, in this tradition, you start with, like I said, first strong and rhythmic breathing. And then the aim is that, you know, whether you're a beginner or an advanced practitioner, you do at least 2 hour meditation session. And within that, you don't move, you don't change posture, you have to focus very much on it. And at this center, you can use the breathing technique in order to handle any physical or mental sensation or vedana that comes with that. This is slightly different if we look at Sonlon tradition. In Sonlon tradition, you only breathe for the first 45 minutes, and then the rest is you stop the breathing, and then you just have to watch the vedana. So it can be very intense, much more intense than here. So for the beginner, you start with that. For people who have become more familiar with it, with the technique, and also the concentration and the sati, so mindfulness becomes stronger, then they move on to kind of bhavaṅga or bhavaṅga state. Bhavaṅga-citta is, I like what Len said about being passive mind. It's not often in the scholarship, it's being translated as luminous mind or the bright mind, but actually it's a passive mind. According to Theravada Abhidhamma, bhavaṅga is where the kind of mental state that you have when you are in deep sleep, or when we don't have active mental processes. Okay, so that's why it's active and passive. It's very, very kind of accurate, I would say. So when you in the intermediate stage, what I call intermediate stage, that's where you become more aware of bhavaṅga-citta, the passive mind. The sati becomes stronger, samadhi becomes stronger, and aware visual experience or a sign that you can notice the bhavaṅga-citta is kind of tension in the heart. So the chest might become very tight, or or the heart area, becoming more aware of the heartbeat and so forth. But because bear in mind that in this tradition, you're doing meditation in sitting posture almost all the time, slightly different from, say, Mahasi tradition, where you incorporate sitting and walking meditation. But here, the focus is sitting. And then when you go and move on to the advanced stage, what the meditator is encouraged to do is to focus on characteristics of the Vedana, 4 elements, 5 aggregates, and so forth, and cause and effects, of course. But in this meditation center, what you find is the use of fast breathing and strong breathing, so that you don't fall into bhavaṅga-citta, meaning you don't fall asleep. For those who are very well versed in the practice, you will actually know what I'm talking about, I hope. We have a term called yogi sleep. We don't fall into that. And so those are the steps. You might be wondering, okay, how does that relate to visual experience? In this meditation center and the teachers from there, they also talk about asubhanimitta, and Theinngu himself also relates to and explain about this using the story of Kyaw, a very well-known disciple of the Buddha, and we find in commentaries where the whole story is kind of elaborately explained. And the story is that Kyaw, before she became a bhikkhuni or a nun, she took pride in her beauty. And because the Buddha is kind of well known for pointing things out, she avoided meeting the Buddha. So she didn't want to meet the Buddha because the Buddha would say, look, you're a bunch of a group of bones, or your body is kind of deteriorating. She didn't want to hear that. That's why she was kind of moving around and avoiding the Buddha. But King Bimbisara, her husband, kind of royal command made her meet the Buddha. So eventually she met the Buddha. But at that instant, the Buddha created a very beautiful girl. According to Theinngu, the girl was 14 years of age, who kind of coming into teenage years and very beautiful. But then again, using the abhiññāna, so supernormal powers, the Buddha then turned the girl into bones. So here, this is a Burmese painting, a contemporary modern Burmese painting, where you can see the girl fanning the Buddha, and then you can also see the bones as well. So Kyaw is here. She's looking at the girl and then thinking, oh, she's so beautiful. She's much prettier than me. And then at that moment, her pride actually kind of disintegrated, and the Buddha knew, and then the Buddha pronounced this kind of one of the Dhammapada verse. So this story is used within the tradition, not just in Theinngu tradition, but also in Phyo tradition as well. In Phyo tradition, one of the teachers from there actually taught me this story many years ago. I think it was in 2006. So just to kind of go cover all the grounds, as it were. This nun also, she explained her visual experience and also personal experience in relation to asubhanimitta. Because we were talking about this kind of esoteric and exoteric kind of nature of the meditation, her discussion of her own experience is widely shared. I think it was live streamed a few weeks ago as part of meditation retreat. So what's happening in Burma and Burmese meditation tradition these days is with Zoom and everything, it's becoming more public. Is in more public arena, the kind of experience. I mean, this is not new. If we look at Theinngu Sayadaw's practice and experience, we see a lot of detail about his own meditation practice, which was given, he was talking about those in 1960s and 70s. So bhavaṅga, again, I'm not going to explain in detail, but in Theravada Abhidhamma, bhavaṅga-citta is more like this. So the gaps between the active ones. And so it's a passive mind, but the whole point about meditation in Theinngu tradition, I can't say for others, is that in order to become aware of these passive mode of our citta, so that we know all the processes, how one moves from active mode to passive mode, and then active mode again, so that we know the mental processes. The signs of bhavaṅga-citta. So people in meditation practice talk about bright light or luminous, ticking or tapping in the heart. This is very one of the anecdotes that was given by Venerable Sarah, you were at the conference, and he was explaining about that, right? And again, it's very similar, or I can my experience resonates with what he was saying at that time. Very cool, calm, calmness in the heart, and then it's bhavaṅga-citta is like a clear, spotless mirror which can reflect whatever things happening inside and outside. And then changes from the passive to active mind. So this is drawing on my own experience. I just want to highlight a little bit. So the thing is that if you have an experience and understanding of the bhavaṅga-citta and know the various subtleties and comes with that, what you can experience is you can experience anger and how it arises. So, at the beginner stage, you might be experiencing anger like the clenching of fists. So something that grabbing your heart and you know it because you're angry and you can recognize anger in that way. As you move along the practice, what you might be able to experience is anger arising, but it's more like blooming lotus. So from the heart or from the bhavaṅga, as say or hatiya, the anger is kind of blooming, and then it might stay like that, or it might wither away, or it might just, the petals might fall apart, depending on your experience, your own practice, your own manasikara, so right intention. So a range of possibilities. And then one final point on yogi sleep. This is where in Thai forest tradition, they also discuss this. And the point is that in Theinngu tradition, you can use the strong, heavy breathing to move away from there. So that you don't actually fall into this kind of sleep state. So just to kind of a very conclusion, what we've seen in this talk is a variety of meditation objects, and also the variety of teaching techniques. It depends on each teacher as well as each practitioner. And also a wide range of visual practice experiences. So, for example, can every meditator experience asubhanimitta or asubha meditation? Well, it depends. It's they would say in Theinngu tradition, they would say that it depends on one's own parami, one's own professions, whether you have this kind of practice or a encounter in a previous life, or your karmic conditions. So it depends on that. And the final point that I want to say here is peeling the lotus or lotus petals or onions. It's the more you go and you progress along the path or the practice, things get more subtle. And that's you get to very soft, subtle teas, and the aim is to see all the processes. I just want to highlight the selective bibliography, because some of the things that I talked about can be found in my article, The Sound of the Breath. Although I was focusing more on if you look at the title, it's just about the breath. Actually, it's more than that, because it looks at a range of practices that Sayadaw and Theinngu Sayadaws they experience. So, but this is just a kind of selective bibliography. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phyo, for such a lovely balance of the emic and the etic and your personal and theories. Very, very learned and very, very vivid and experiential. Thank you very much. Have we got time for a couple of questions? Yes, we have. Good. Now, I'd love to ask you lots of questions, but there's one in particular I wanted to clarify, and it's about the asubhanimitta. Now, as a meditation object, the asubhanimitta, of course, is a calm. It's taught in the canon as a calming jhana meditation, certainly only to the first jhana, and then I think if you have a skull, you take the whiteness and go to further jhanas on the white rather than the skull. And there seems to be a conflation in this teaching between the asubhanimitta as a samatha practice and as almost like a saññā, where it becomes a vehicle to insight.
Yeah.
Would you say that was correct? Do you develop one and then move on to the other? Because my understanding is that asubha meditation is the festering corpses and things are the 10 calm meditations. So is it correct to say that you develop it first as potentially a jhana practice and then move to make it a saññā practice? Yeah.
Yes. So it's more like a progressive one, rather than conflating the two things.
Right. Yes.
I wouldn't use the word conflating, because
no,
they are not.
Yes.
They're not.
It's not. They're not together. Yeah.
So it's more like a progression. so the nuns that I mentioned, this nun, her experience is a bit more like that. So moving from you know, a kind of like if you like a samatha type experience, and then overcoming that by kind of focusing on the mind and how one perceives this nimitta, and then kind of bringing the vipassana elements with it, meaning, okay, this is decay, this is impermanent, this is anicca, and then from there they go from into turn it into dust.
So it is classical Visuddhimagga meditation, then, just framed in a slightly.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
frame is much more fluid.
Yes, I understand. So it's not put in that white box.
Yes.
And when cannot control the body, is this bodily joy, the PTs?
Because it's interesting, because it's not really going to the extent of piti. Even at the initial stage, they often talk about the decay from the beginning. So when I said they cannot control the body, meaning that it's, you know, she was sitting and then she would fall down, her body kind of manifesting all the decay process, as it were. So
from the beginning, it's got that flavor of.
And that's where Lance talked about this kind of intertwining samatha, and yes, I like that.
Okay, thank you very much. And as you say, conflation is not the right word because it's moving there. Thank you. Are there any more questions? I'd like to spend a long time asking questions, but I shall open the floor. Right.
Thank you very much. It was very good. Just one question out of curiosity. You said that the first master, Theinngu, he attained the third stage of liberation. And how was that recognized? He claimed that by himself that was recognized by the master, and on what ground?
Right. And so I promised you that I will come back, and then I didn't have time. But according to his Dhamma talks, the way that he explained his various stages of attainments, it's much more kind of retrospective, in a sense that you know, as he started teaching, he was talking about that. The third stage was interesting because the way the Theinngu explained was he was going practicing in forest, and then he was on the toilet, I mean outdoor toilet, and then during that time he had this kind of experience, not physical, but you know, the mind, his mind went to a Brahma Loka. And then he talked about how realizing that and realizing, okay, now I'm here, and then looked around and saw all the Brahma, and then he then thought, no, that can't be right. I have to get back into my body. So it's body-mind separation to an extent. Okay, so that's how he would talk about that. In
I'm just wondering about your walk. It's
and then in the final stages, how he described his attainment was also there. Visual is what we might call visual experience in the fourth stage, where he was the way he explained was, it's like his mind was on an island, and the mind was kind of looking, seeking out different, you know, do I have this desire? Do I have this thing? And then he was going back and kind of practicing vipassana again, kind of in terms of nature, dukkha, anatta, very standardized way of contemplating. So and then he then realized, and he then kind of overcame all the saññā, all the perception. So then in there he used the visual imagery of being on an island and then seeking out different things. Yeah.
And then this gets questioned by.
And then this gets questioned by a various learned monks who know the scriptures, and then who in a way confirm the attainments or various understandings. And in Burmese Buddhism, that practice has continued, and you know, because if we look at the meditation tradition in contemporary Burma, kind of started by a very learned monk like Lady Sayadaw. And then so that the tradition of checking one's meditative experience with the scriptures has been important. You know, it's still important now. Yeah.
Very important.
Cigarettes.
We need to stop. Yes.
Yes.
So we thank you very much, P. I think everybody had lots more questions, so I think you'll get pursued in the break. Thank you very much.
So we've got time factored in for discussion later as well. So sorry if we are dragging along a little bit, but please save questions for later. Refreshments are served upstairs, just the room off the foyer. And we'll be back here at hour, when we'll try and start as promptly as we can. Thank you.